Hello, I'm Greg Rose for PharmExperts.com. Today we're speaking with Dr. James Barrett, a professor in the Department of Physiology and Pharmacology and director of the Program in Drug Discovery and Development at Drexel University College of Medicine. Dr. Barrett, thank you for speaking with us. Your presentation at the Experimental Biology 2008 meeting deals with translational medicine. What is translational medicine?
The term is relatively new. I believe the concept is old. In 1944, I believe the Public Health Service Act from Congress authorized the formation of a clinical center at the NIH. The objective of that clinical center, as obligated by law, was to improve the relationship between clinical science and basic research activities. So in some sense, this is a reincarnation of an old concept, 60 or 70 years old, but in a new framework. So currently, translational medicine is one that embraces new technologies, genomics, proteomics, lipidomics, tries to blend them into expediting the process from basic science to clinical development, and then using the clinical development findings to feed back into basic research activity. So in a sense, it's bidirectional. In a sense, it's intended to address the relatively long time it takes from basic science to be translated into clinical applications and then fed back into basic science activities again.
So while it's an older concept, it seems as though there's an increasing level of enthusiasm for it in the current drug discovery and development paradigm.
Right. That's true. And I think the point that remains to be proven is whether, in fact, it does itself translate into shorter turnaround times, higher throughput, more focused drug targets with greater clinical efficacy. And I think the effort also stems from a substantial initiative at the NIH by the director of the National Institutes of Health to try and bring medicines more quickly into those patients that need them severely. Whether this actually translates into more expeditious drug development, I think, is an experimental question and remains to be seen.
Fair enough. You have unusually broad experience in CNS pharmacology, having worked on analgesics, compounds for mood disorders, and even cognition-enhancing compounds. Mm-hmm. Are there areas of particularly pressing unmet medical need?
I think all of those, with the possible exception of anxiolytics, still show tremendous unmet need. The research focusing on pain, for example, spans a 200-year period. We still are fortunate to have three classes of analgesics available: opioids, nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories, and steroids, occasionally tricyclic antidepressants. But still, we don't have analgesics to treat severe cancer pain with any degree of efficacy, end-of-life issues that don't have other issues and aspects associated with them.
In your opinion, in which of these areas has there been major progress in recent years?
I think what's been dramatic within the last decade or so is not perhaps the development of new drugs to target those various indications, but greater insight into the disease process itself, and a recognition that the diseases are not homogeneous. They're very heterogeneous. Schizophrenia, for example, as you well know, the focus has been for some time on positive and negative symptoms of schizophrenia. There is now an appropriate emphasis on trying to address the cognitive aspects of schizophrenia. The same is true with depression. The same is true with analgesia. And so in each of these areas, there are proliferation of targets that have been identified, and this is where translational medicine comes in. Is it possible to take those targets and with any greater degree of efficacy or accuracy move them into the clinic, validate them in the clinic as early as possible, and then move them through the rest of the regulatory issues? So I wouldn't say that any of those areas has made substantial and unequivocal progress with regard to the identification of new molecular entities, although I think there are some on the horizon. The recent publication for example, of the mGluR2/3 combined with a 5-HT receptor and the complex that forms, showing very nice suggestions for antipsychotic activity. And I think the identification of some of the subunits for the benzodiazepine receptors are also giving us some insight into being able to potentially separate the anticonvulsant, the anxiolytic, and the sedative hypnotic aspects of those compounds. And even the alpha 2 and 3 subunits have now been identified as potentially potent analgesics. So I think the science is moving at a rapid pace. I think the hope is that translational medicine will be able to coalesce all of the different aspects of target identification, preclinical animal models, and then early clinical assessment into a more expeditious route to improving therapeutics.
Innovation in the pharmaceutical industry seems to be declining. Do you have any thoughts about how we can stimulate innovation in new drug discovery and development?
You don't need to stray too far from your scientific journals to realize that the pharmaceutical pipelines are fallow. And if you look at the submissions to the FDA and if you look at the drug approvals over the last decade, you'll see that they've dropped somewhere from 35 to about 5. And that's for small molecules. For biopharmaceuticals, it's even smaller. And that is in the face of rapidly escalating costs and commitments to R&D. So what's happening? We haven't been able to embrace the new technologies, the promise of genomics. Producing novel, innovative therapies just around the corner hasn't materialized. I think it will. But the question of innovation is a complex one, obviously. But I believe if you look at where innovation occurs and where you look at basic science, making pioneering inroads into understanding disease mechanisms, it's not in the drug companies. It can't be in the drug companies. They are driven too much so by relatively rapid turnaround. Fast is good when it's appropriate. But if you look at where those innovations and primary discoveries come from, they primarily come from academic institutions. So if I were to suggest one concrete route for producing innovative aspects into the pharmaceutical industry, I would say look to academia and look to partnerships where you can give the relative freedom and spontaneity of research without necessarily having definitive quarterly reports to financial agencies, and blend that with the power of the pharmaceutical companies to be able to move quickly when something happens mechanistically. You may be able to move more quickly through that process where you're not encumbering the individuals in the drug discovery effort to move things through from a target to a molecule, but you're pulling that in from a different source. So either academic institutions, partnerships with small biotech companies that take a little more time to ramp up, but when they do it, they've got something very unique and very innovative.
Dr. Barrett, thank you very much for your insightful comments.
You're welcome.